Hi everyone, I hope your day is peaceful. In today's gentle chapter of the Sam and Lee series, we follow a quiet morning that slowly turns into one of the most emotional moments between them. Sam carries her basket of tangerines to the market, hoping to earn just enough for another calm day. Meanwhile, Lee spends his morning quietly fixing the farm, thinking of her in every small task. And when Sam returns home, a simple surprise from Lee stops her whole world for a moment. If you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next episodes. Morning arrived softly across the Red Earth Valley, the kind of gentle light that felt more like a whisper than a sunrise. Sam adjusted the woven basket strapped firmly across her back, feeling the familiar tug on her shoulders. Inside, nestled in careful layers, were the tangerines she had picked the afternoon before, small, bright, glossy with natural oil that caught the early sun. When she turned her head slightly, she could smell them. Warm citrus, the scent of sun lingering on the peel, something clean and hopeful woven into the weight she carried. She stepped onto the narrow red dirt road that curved out from the farm and into the hills. Dew rested lazily on the tall grass, brushing her ankles. A cool breeze drifted through the areca palms, their shadows stretched long, almost touching her feet. Behind her, Mick barked once, a short, loyal sound that felt like goodbye and good luck braided together. Sam lifted a hand in a small wave without turning around. She didn't need to look back. She could imagine the dog's tail wagging, the way he watched her, until she disappeared around the bend. The basket grew heavier with each step, but it wasn't a burden she minded. Hard work rarely frightened her. Uncertainty did. And lately, life had been full of uncertainties. The price of rice shifting, the storms that had swept through weeks ago, the quiet moments at night when the old fears returned, and she wondered if she was doing enough for herself, for Mick, for the little life she was trying to rebuild. So she leaned into the weight on her back, letting it ground her, letting it remind her that she still had something to offer the world. When she reached the garden owner's house, a small cement home with faded blue windows and rows of fruit trees stretching behind it, she set the basket down, her breath leaving her slowly in a sigh that felt both tired and satisfied. She weighed each kilo carefully. Her fingers were precise, gentle, the way they always were when handling money or fruit, as though she believed both deserved respect. She counted the bills twice, pressing the edges flat before folding them neatly. When she thanked the owner, her eyes were warm, sincere. She had learned that sincerity, even in small transactions, made life a little lighter. With the empty basket now swinging against her back, she continued toward the morning market, following the buzz of voices that grew louder with each step. By the time Sam arrived, the world was fully awake. Vendors called out from every corner, their voices layered and energetic. Motorbikes hummed through narrow paths. Someone nearby sizzled fish cakes in hot oil. A child cried because he dropped a custard apple. A group of teenagers laughed over something on a phone screen. It was chaotic, wrapped in its own rhythm, but Sam had grown used to this kind of noise that belonged to life, not danger. She found a small space near the edge of the walkway, spread out a thin plastic sheet, and arranged the tangerines into rounded piles. In the morning light, the fruit glowed as though lit from within. tiny golden suns resting in her hands. Sam sat quietly behind them, letting the world move around her. She didn't shout or wave her arms like the louder vendors. She had never been good at that. Instead, she relied on her gentle smile, her steady presence, her simple call, homegrown tangerines. Very sweet. 25,000 a kilo. Whenever someone slowed down, her heart lifted. Whenever they walked away, she reminded herself not to take it personally. She had learned that hope came in small steps, one customer at a time, 1 kilo at a time, one quiet day at a time. And as she watched the tangerines reflect the soft light, she whispered inside her mind, "If I can sell them all, if I can earn enough for rice, then maybe today will be just a little easier." Back at the farm, the world felt completely different, almost motionless compared to the restless energy of the market. Wind rustled gently through the tall areca palms, scattering soft shadows across the ground. Lee stepped into the yard with a small bowl in his hand, expecting Mick to run up, expecting Sam to be nearby. Instead, he found silence. The old food tray sat empty, a thin layer of dust clinging to its surface, and the yard looked disorganized from the storms that had passed through days earlier. He sighed, not loudly, but in that quiet, resigned way of someone who had grown used to mending whatever life broke. "Sam must have left early again," he murmured. He set down the bowl and surveyed the yard. Broken bricks leaned against the wall. Old wood planks were scattered, some warped from rain. Dust had settled on nearly everything. Without hesitating, Lee rolled up his sleeves. Cleaning wasn't something he complained about. Work, in any form, steadied him. He gathered the broken pieces into neat piles, lifting heavy bricks without strain. He swept away dust with long strokes, clearing the ground. When he reached the stack of old planks beside the house, he crouched down and inspected them one by one. Most were cracked or damp, but he found several pieces that still held their strength, their grain steady and smooth beneath his fingers. He carried them to the yard center, where the sunlight was strongest, and began shaping them. He measured lengths using the span of his hand. He sawed with precise, rhythmic motions. He hammered gently so the sound wouldn't startle the animals. Slowly, deliberately, a new food tray took shape, far sturdier than the old one, built with a water compartment so Mike wouldn't have to wander far on hot days. When he set it down in the same spot, Mike appeared as if on cue, tail wagging wildly. Lee chuckled softly and scratched behind the dog's ears. Moments like this, small, unnoticed, were sometimes the ones he valued most. That was when he heard footsteps outside the gate. He looked up as Sam stepped through, her shoulders slightly lowered from carrying the empty basket, the faint smell of tangerine still clinging to her shirt. Her eyes immediately landed on the open trunk of his car. Lee walked over and lifted a handful of items, gift after gift, each more unexpected than the last. A brand new lawnmower still smelling of metal and paint, young trees wrapped in damp cloth, a charger, a shiny dog bowl with 2 neat sections. Sam froze, her breath hitched. "These are for you," he said softly. "The mower will make trimming easier. These trees will give shade later. And this bowl, Mick will love it." Her eyes filled instantly, glistening under the afternoon light. She whispered, "Thank you, thank you," over and over, her voice trembling. She looked at him, then at the gifts, then back again. Her heart raced, full of something quiet but overwhelming. Lee ruffled her hair gently. "Just little things," he said. But Sam could see the truth in his eyes. He had thought of her in every small moment, every day, every breath. The afternoon sun climbed higher, pouring heat into every corner of the brickyard until the air shimmered above the ground. Lee set his jacket aside, folding it carefully and placing it on the chair beneath the shade. His t-shirt clung to him, soaked along the back and shoulders as he bent to lift a row of bricks. Sweat slid down his arms, catching the light in thin silver lines. Yet he moved steadily, almost calmly, as if the heat had no claim on him at all. Sam watched from a short distance, her eyes tracing the clear purpose in every one of his movements. There was something comforting about the way he worked. No rush, no frustration, just quiet strength. She reached for the lawnmower he had brought and tested the handle. When the engine roared to life with a deep, vibrant hum, she startled, then burst into a bright laugh that echoed off the yard walls. She ran toward the house, her footsteps quick, and returned with a straw hat. Without hesitation, she slipped it onto his head, her fingertips brushing lightly across his forehead. "It's blazing hot," she murmured, half scolding, half gentle. Lee tilted the hat slightly to the side with a grin, as if to say he heard her concern, even if he pretended not to. Then he bent again and resumed building the brick grill, pressing each brick firmly into place. Sam set up a small metal table at the edge of the yard and poured cold water into a cup. She called him over, but he only paused long enough to take a single sip, nodding at her in quiet gratitude before returning to his work. She didn't follow him. Instead, she slipped into the kitchen and washed her hands beneath the cool tap. The water ran clear and cold over her skin. She dried her palms slowly, then reached for a bowl of potatoes and carrots waiting on the counter. As she sliced the vegetables, the rhythmic sound of her knife blended with the muffled thud of Lee's trowel outside. Sam mixed flour, water, and herbs, kneading the dough with steady motions. The scent was warm and comforting, rising gently into the kitchen air. As she worked, her mind drifted, not to the market, not to the bills she still needed to calculate tonight, not even to the ache in her shoulders, but to Lee. She remembered the mornings when he would silently watch her leave for the market, his eyes following her, until she disappeared down the road. She remembered the nights she had cried alone, thinking of all the mistakes and losses she had carried for years. And she remembered the way Lee had been there, not with dramatic gestures or big promises, but with small acts of care, steady as breath. Today he was building her something again, brick by brick, piece by piece, a corner of peace that she hadn't known she was allowed to have. When the vegetable patties were frying gently in the pan, Sam leaned against the counter and listened. The mower outside hummed occasionally as she tested it again. The trowel hit stone, firm and even. The breeze carried the smell of earth, dust, and faint citrus. It felt like the farm itself was breathing with them. She arranged the patties on a plate, round, golden, steaming, and called him to come inside. The kitchen was cooler, the shade offering quiet relief from the heat. Sam placed the plate in the center of the table. She slid a warm piece onto Lee's plate and sat down across from him, her hands folding together, as if waiting for a verdict only he could give. Lee took a bite. The moment his teeth sank into the warm crust, his eyes widened, lighting up with unexpected delight. "It's really good," he said, his voice soft, almost boyish in its honesty. Sam felt something flutter gently in her chest. She hid her smile behind a sip of water, but her eyes stayed on him longer than she planned. The simple joy on his face made the hours of work feel worthwhile. She hesitated a moment before speaking again, her voice gentler, quieter. "Lee, any word from Duke? And is Sister Owen doing any better?" Lee set down his glass, slowly, the motion careful, almost too careful. His features dimmed as though someone had lowered the brightness of his entire expression. He looked at the surface of the table, at a small scratch near his plate, and let out a long, soft breath. "This morning, she was still very sad," he murmured. "Probably because Duke is being transferred far away." Sam didn't speak. Instead, she reached under the table and found his hand. Her fingers wrapped around his gently, not in a dramatic gesture, but with the steady warmth of someone who cared deeply. Lee didn't look up, but his thumb brushed across her knuckles once. Slow, grateful. It was enough. After a long pause, he inhaled deeply, lifting his gaze again. He nudged another cake toward her, a small attempt to bring the weight of the room back down to earth. "But today we're here," he said, his voice steadying. "Let's finish the grill." Sam nodded, and the two of them rose from the table. Outside, the afternoon had started shifting toward evening. The sunlight softened into a warm, glowing orange that stretched across the yard like melted honey. The grill stood half-finished, waiting patiently for their return. Lee knelt beside it again, picking up his trowel. Sam stood close by, brushing dust from the bricks and handing him fresh ones as he needed them. They didn't fill the air with conversation. Their silence wasn't empty. It was comfortable, shared, familiar. Sam found herself watching the way Lee worked, the slight tightening of his jaw as he focused, the steady pattern of his breath. She thought of how many storms they had endured separately before finding their way to this small, simple yard. How many battles he fought quietly, how many fears she carried alone. And here they were now, two people building something solid together without even needing to name it. By the time the last row of bricks was laid, the shadows had grown long. Lee sat back, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a faint streak of dust across his forehead. Sam stepped closer, her fingertips tracing the edge of the newly finished grill. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we can barbecue." Lee tapped the firewood door near the bottom. "You can use it whenever you want," he said. She turned toward him fully, her voice trembling, the kind of tremble that comes from a full heart rather than fear. "Thank you. Truly." Lee didn't respond with words. Instead, he lifted a hand and brushed a strand of hair gently away from her face. His eyes softened, filled with something that didn't need naming. The air cooled around them. A faint scent of earth and lingering tangerine drifted across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, Mick barked softly, as if sensing the peace settling between the two. Sam slipped her hand into Lee's. "Stay for dinner, okay?" she whispered. Lee nodded, a warm smile tugging at the corners of his tired face. Together they walked toward the house. Their shadows stretched long behind them over the red earth. Two silhouettes moving in quiet harmony, the storms behind them fading into memory as evening gathered around the farm. Inside, as they prepared a simple meal, Sam felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a gentle steadiness, a sense that not every moment needed to be hard, not every day needed to be survived. Some evenings, like this one, were meant simply to be lived, and for the first time in months, she let that peace settle fully into her chest. Sometimes the moments that stay with us are the ones built slowly, brick by brick, gesture by gesture, until comfort begins to feel like home again. And when two people learn to care in small, steady ways, even an ordinary evening can feel like the whole world finally exhaling.